Hello viewer, we're glad you could find time again to join us on this week's episode of God's Love in Action. I'm your host, Justus. Welcome to the show. Pastor, welcome. We're actually looking at Obadiah.
Yes.
And the role that he was able to play during his time. He is one person whose love for God is explicitly revealed through the story that we read in the book of 1 Kings.
Yes.
Particularly, his role in the palace, where he was serving as the palace administrator for King Ahab and the queen Jezebel. Obadiah, a man of God, in a palace whose king and queen are worshipping idols, or at least promoting the worship of idols.
Yes.
This was not an easy task for this guy, was it?
No, it was not. The Old Testament is a very strong and very inspiring book. When you look at this story, Obadiah is operating within an atmosphere that probably none of us would have managed. The story is about the drought in Samaria. You see, Ahab is the king. Jezebel is the queen. But Ahab has driven the entire nation to idolatry. Jezebel has done the same. In fact, the queen and the king are alike in behavior and actions. They are all promoting idols, promoting Baal. I don't know if you are there actually as a head of family and all you can do is to draw your family towards idolatry, then I doubt your purpose in life. As a matter of fact, King Ahab has done nothing except idol worship. But the interesting part of the story is King Ahab is actually the king, Jezebel is the queen, but the palace administrator, the name of a man you mentioned, Obadiah, is playing a very important role here. When the king and the queen are all for Baal, Obadiah is for the Lord. And this, I think, must have made it very difficult for him to operate, because what do you do when the king is promoting Baal, is promoting idolatry? But I want to thank God for Obadiah. In spite of all these problems, the man is still moving with the Lord.
You know, at this point, actually, if you look back from the story as we looked at in our other episodes, after Elijah had actually prophesied that there was going to be drought
for three and a
half years. At this point, you know, they are in the dry season. And it's not even ringing any bells to the king and the queen in terms of the practice, the worship of idols, because what the prophet of God prophesied actually has come to pass. But it's not even in any way helping them to reconsider their ways, is it?
You know, sometimes when people are so obsessed with wrongdoing, the ears and the eyes don't function. By this time, they are supposed to have reconsidered their action, like you have said. But you can even trace the whole challenge at the very time when Elijah came to announce drought. Elijah came to announce drought, that it was not going to rain for 3.5 years. And instead of Ahab trying to correct his mistake, he's looking for Elijah to kill him.
Yes.
You see,
to kill the messenger.
Yes, he's looking for Elijah to kill the messenger. You see, you can kill all the preachers, you can kill all the messengers, but God will still be God. You see, it doesn't change God's way of operating. God has already said it, and it has to happen the way He has said it.
And the obsession is not just in, you know, killing Elijah, but any other prophet of God, for that matter.
They did. In fact, the whole work that Jezebel did was to kill. It was to kill the priests of the Lord.
So she mounts, a very strong effort
Yeah.
in hunting down anyone that prophesies
That's right.
or stands for God
Precisely.
with the intention of destroying them.
Actually, I don't know how Obadiah survived.
Survived.
Because it's quite a myth that Obadiah could survive in a situation like this one. You see, when Elijah mentions the drought, he runs away, and a manhunt is launched to look for him, but they don't find him because Elijah was not any man. Elijah was a man who was standing for God. And so Elijah did not hide himself. Elijah was hidden by God. As a matter of fact, we know the story. But if you want to hide, Justus, let me tell you, if you want to hide, let God hide you. Yes, you'll have hidden very well. Let God hide you. And if you want to hide, hide in him. Like Song 525 says, hiding in thee. That's the safest place.
Right.
Yes.
There's one more thing that Obadiah was able to do when he realized that the prophets of God were, under
attack.
Under attack.
Yes. Actually, it was a serious genocide.
Yes.
Yes.
So he actually availed himself to be used of God in terms of protecting and hiding these particular prophets.
First of all, when Ahab and Jezebel are all for Baal, idolatry, one man called Obadiah is still on the side of the Lord. I want to emphasize this point. There is always a person standing for the Lord. That one is always there. When all of us are falling down in matters of spirituality, there is always a faithful person standing up. When all of us are just going by the world, worshiping idols, there is someone actually worshiping the Lord. As a matter of fact, when everybody else is unfaithful, there is always a faithful person. That is the remnant, actually. This example of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is a very common example, but sometimes we make Bible texts so common to the level that we pay very little attention when they have a lot to teach us. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were the only people who remained standing when the whole Babylon was down worshiping the image.
And I think the whole lesson in this is not to just be happy that there will always be someone standing, but to ask myself if I'll be that person who would remain standing.
Yes. Can we be that person? Can you be that person who remains standing when everybody is falling down? So was Obadiah. But why is Obadiah really doing this? Obadiah had understood God. Obadiah had loved God. Somewhere Obadiah tells us that he had worshipped God since he was a youth.
Right.
I mean, it's not about how long you have been in the church. In fact, I have heard very many people say, I have been in the church for the last 40 years. You see, spirituality is not about experience. I mean, no. And so you have been in the church for the last 40 years. So what? So what? You see, what is very important is, what are you doing with the Lord with the 40 years? What are you doing with the Lord right now? You see, in those previous episodes, when you looked at David and Goliath, the whole Israel had resigned, fearing Goliath.
Yet they had all the experience.
They had all the experience. I mean, they had all the time. They have been there. But what are you doing with the Lord today? Is the critical point we need to discuss, and the critical point we need to put and leave it in our lives. What are we doing with the Lord?
So Obadiah takes hold of these prophets of God.
Yes.
We are told of 100 in number.
Yes.
And he hides them in caves.
Yes. You see, Obadiah watched the people of God, men of God, being slaughtered like chicken, being slaughtered like cows, because the whole palace administration, the whole palace leadership is now promoting Baal and not God. So whoever belonged to God, including the priests, were all slaughtered. But Obadiah thinks twice and says, no, I can't allow this to happen. Let me save some people. He got 100 priests. He hid 50 he hid the 100 in 2 caves, 50 in each cave. And you know, looking for a cave to accommodate 50 people is not a simple task. And probably he had wanted to keep all of them in one cave, but they could not fit. So he had to look for another cave. It's not a simple task. And you know, he's working against
all odds.
Yes, he's against all odds. He's against his master. How he did it, you can't imagine. But when the Lord is with you, anything is possible.
And he does not just hide them, but
no.
We are told he feeds, he provides for them.
Yes. He gives them water, he gives them food, and he gives them accommodation, because it is him who looked for this natural accommodation called caves. You see, just as we are discussing something very important, God's love in action. Now, when Obadiah had God in him, the love of God was in Obadiah. And so, inevitably, he has to give. Inevitably, he has to spend. Inevitably, he has to save people's lives. You see, because that's what it is when the love of God gets into you. The love of God is done. The love of God is not just said. So he provided, he spent, he gave them water, he gave them food. And we need to see this very critically.
We need to find out what happens next.
Yeah.
Because later on, Elijah shows up.
Yes.
So we want to look at that encounter
Yes.
and see what happens. Stay tuned, dear viewer. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back, our dear viewer. You're in time for God's Love in Action. Right before the break, we had actually seen how much Obadiah had to go through in trying to save the prophets of God, as it were, those who were standing for God. And Obadiah has gone to the extent of hiding, we mentioned, 100 of God's prophets in caves, which we said it was not an easy task given the odds. But there's one person who at this point is not in the picture. And this is Elijah.
The prophet.
Remember, Elijah the prophet
Yes.
had gone into hiding.
Yeah.
He had actually been hid by God himself when he pronounced the 3.5-year drought season. And so at this point, Obadiah is actually operating just by himself, not knowing where the prophet of God is. In fact, they had mounted a manhunt for Elijah because the queen wanted Elijah dead after his announcement. But somehow, in the process of all this, Elijah reappears. And he meets Obadiah face to face.
Yes. It all starts with the Ahab going to one part of the territory and Obadiah going to another part of the territory. They are both looking for water for the horses and the mules. And so while Obadiah is performing his function, is looking for water, and I don't know how expectant they were, really, because it was dry for a long time. As a matter of fact, around this time is about 3 years. And you know, 3 years is a long period when it is dry. Finally, the prophet bumps into Obadiah. And the prophet says, no, when the prophet appeared, Obadiah looks at the prophet and actually recognizes him. He recognizes him. He says, "Oh, my Lord, like, is it you?" Of course, since Obadiah was a man of God and Elijah is a man of God, they must have met before as people of God. And so, is it you? Elijah said, yes, I'm the one. In fact, I want you to go and tell Ahab that I'm here. That one makes it very dangerous. Go and tell your master Ahab, I'm here. You see, Elijah's response was a bit unusual.
Right.
And Obadiah looks at the situation and he can't understand it. He says, my Lord, I know you. I know God. If I go and tell Ahab, and I don't know where the Spirit will have carried you, because, just as that statement alone tells you that Obadiah knew God. Obadiah knew what God was capable of doing. As a matter of fact, Obadiah had already concluded that this Elijah had been hidden by God. He is doubting. He's doubting. I doubt whether I will find you still here.
Yes.
If I go and tell him, because I don't know where the Spirit may carry you to. The Spirit, the way you work with God, may put me in trouble, because he knew, since God stands for his people, as soon as you say, you go to tell Ahab, then God does something for his servant. By the time you come back, you don't find him. And what is the next step? Obadiah to die. So he said, I'm not very sure. I'm not sure. You see, what is happening here is something to teach us quite a number of lessons. Obadiah is aware of what God is capable of doing. God can hide his servant. God had hidden his servant. God had fed his servant. He first fed him with using the raven. Again, he fed him using the widow. God is taking care. You see, this is how God takes care. By the way, Obadiah is also aware that God had taken care of him that far.
Right.
Because he has taken care of the 100 priests. He has provided them with water and food. He had found accommodation for them in the caves. And up this moment, he has not received any trouble. So he is also cognizant of that fact that God can take care of him.
That informs his fear. Because we see he's actually scared to death. He's scared for his life.
Yes.
That if that happens, that he goes and reports this message that Elijah is giving him to the king and the queen, and they come and they don't find him, he will be
dead.
He'll be dead.
Yes.
And all this effort, this progress that he has made in trying to secure the safety of these other prophets, all that he's scared could also be at risk. And there's so much to lose from Obadiah's point of view.
Of course, yes. And he's very much afraid of that. But Elijah is not withdrawing his statement. He's saying, it doesn't matter. You are the one to tell him. You see, Obadiah was so placed in matters of leadership that he knew what was happening in the palace. He knew who was being looked for. He knew who was supposed to be persecuted. He knew the next move the palace was going to take. And so Elijah knows there is nobody else who can do this except Obadiah. As a matter of fact, at this time, Obadiah is the only Obadiah who knows where Ahab is. Because Ahab is the other side of the territory. So Obadiah is still, Elijah is still pushing for Obadiah to go and tell Ahab.
There are messages, I think, then that are really quite difficult to communicate.
Yes, some of them are hard.
But either way, we have to communicate them.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, some messages are quite difficult to communicate. But as long as it is God who is sending you, don't hesitate to communicate. Like right now, until we learn to put God's love into action, we can never even grow spiritually. Until we learn to put God's love into action, God may never work with us the way he wants to work with us. Until, and you know, like we have said in the last episodes, this God's love in action is actually giving. It's nothing less than giving. You see how much Obadiah is giving. Obadiah is giving food to 100 priests. I mean,
on a daily basis.
On a daily basis. I don't know for how long. I mean, if you think about that alone, it is quite a substantial amount of money spent every day. And he did not stop there. He is giving them water on a daily basis. All that is giving. He did not only stop there. He's mindful of the lives of people of God. He has looked for accommodation for them. I mean, he has taken it upon himself. You see, you can't work with God and resist giving.
You see, Pastor, I think Obadiah's case really speaks to a lot of us in many ways, because most of us are actually in positions of Obadiah in one way or the other.
Yes.
But little or do we even consider it a privilege, and that it's by extension that God would like to work through us in reaching out to, you know, some of these priests.
Oh yes.
That
and actually, yes, like you say in a quote, some people, I mean, we are not called upon to work with the priests alone.
Yes.
We are called upon to be relevant, to be useful. You see, you are not useful until you are useful. You see? If you cannot help, if you cannot give, if you cannot assist, I mean, then what kind of spirituality are you living? What kind of Christianity are you professing? What kind of God are you worshiping?
Because Obadiah could as well focused on his main role as a palace administrator, and he would still have been a good person without really going, you know, to
he would have maintained his position. Yes. Yeah. But the love and the worship and the knowledge he has of God does not only stop him from maintaining his position. It moves him a step further to helping, to giving. Someone may ask, how did Obadiah find himself into the palace? That one you may not have a quick answer. But God provides. As a matter of fact, if Obadiah was not in the palace, these 100 men of God would not have survived. So by provision, Obadiah is in the palace. So there are some of us who are in places, some of us members, some of us believers, happen to work in places of responsibility. Some of us work in palaces of these days, in the state houses. We work in parliaments. We work in big ministries. God has placed us there for a purpose. When you are there, you need to let the light of God shine, like Obadiah did. The light of God was still shining in the heart of Obadiah. The love of God was still at work. And Obadiah put the love of God into action.
This is really a challenge to all of us, because we are all in a position of influence at one point in our lives. And so how much we use that opportunity is the main question that we need to ask ourselves. What are your closing words, Pastor?
My closing words, actually I have said them already, but I can say them again. As we live in this world, God will always place us into places where he needs us to act on his behalf, like Obadiah. But when God gives us resources, when God gives us love, we need to translate that love into action.
Right.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Pastor, for your time.
You are welcome.
Dear viewer, that's all we've had time for this week's episode of God's Love in Action. Remember, just like Obadiah, you are in a position that you are in because God has placed you there. And what you do with that opportunity, ask yourself if in any way it's making any positive impact, if you're able to put God's love in action because of the opportunities that He has placed your way. Thank you so much for your time. See you next time.